Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargav, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we talk about miscarriages happening due to COVID-19. We also talk about the residential building that collapsed in the district of Raigad in Maharashtra. But first, we talk about Kashmir. Last week on Saturday, the mainstream political parties of Kashmir, including National Conference, PDP, and Congress, came together to make a joint statement. This statement reiterated their commitment to strive for the restoration of Articles 370 and 35A, which were abrogated more than a year ago. These articles had given J&K its special status, its autonomy. What allowed it to have its own constitution, its own penal code, and what determined the right of permanent residence in the region. But after the August 5th decision, all that was gone. Plus, the state was bifurcated into two union territories. This joint statement now is perhaps the first major political challenge to New Delhi after the crackdown on the region and large-scale detentions of political workers that we have seen this past year. In this segment, we speak to Muzammil Jaleel, Indian Express's deputy editor, and who has been reporting on Kashmir for over 25 years. And he first explains why this joint statement is significant.
Number one, all these political parties, you take National Conference, People's Democratic Party, People's Conference, CPI, ANC, or Congress, they form the majority chunk of the mainstream political parties in Kashmir. In fact, in Jammu and Kashmir. If you leave BJP, which has its core basically in the Hindu majority districts of Jammu, and this small party that has come up in last 1 year known as Apni Party, which is literally the King's Party, which is very close to Delhi. You have no other pro-India group which has been left out of this joint declaration.
These are the parties, Muzammil says, that have for the past 70 years been the political face of India and Kashmir. The ones who have acted as a bridge between the people of the region and New Delhi. The ones that have been pro-India and have wanted to struggle and fight within the ambit of the Indian constitution. Now they have together taken a stand, disagreed with the August 5th decision, and decided to fight it.
The idea that it is only separatist groups who have been opposing this statement has belied that. And despite last 1 year's crackdown on these parties, you will know that these people were in jail. Farooq Abdullah, who is, been chief minister, who's been a central minister, and is currently MP of Srinagar constituency. He was in jail. He was put under Public Safety Act. Umar Abdullah was also a former chief minister. He was put in jail. Mahbub Mufti is still in jail. Scores of former MLAs, scores of former ministers, political activists, and I'm only talking about pro-India groups. The separatists is a completely different story. They are all in jails outside Kashmir. So these people who are actually the face of India, who have been the face of India in Kashmir, they have not only disagreed but voted to fight this. This is significant.
Muzammil points out that most of these parties have actually been alliance partners of BJP in the past. Like the National Conference had an alliance with the BJP during the Vajpayee years. PDP had formed an alliance with BJP in 2014, which finally came to an end in its fourth year. And more interestingly, he says, the chairman of the People Conference, Sajjad Lone, who is part of the joint statement, he had allied with BJP even before the 2014 state elections.
He was their partner all through when they were ruling J&K. And in fact, he was a minister in J&K government on BJP quota during BJP-PDP government. And he is also opposing that. To understand what has happened in last 1 year, we need to look at why Sajjad Lone has changed his stance.
And the reason he changed his stance, Muzammil says, is because he, like the other leaders, understood that the August 5th decision to scrap J&K's special status was not just political, but also an ideological decision. A decision taken to engineer a demographic change in the region.
If you see the orders, whatever order has come, whatever moves have been made, whatever laws have been applicable, small administrative changes that have been made, if you look at them together, you will see a pattern. They're all towards one thing, that how the Muslim majority status of J&K is altered. Everybody feels that Delhi has started looking at Jammu and Kashmir through only one binary, that is Hindu-Muslim binary. The way they are going for delimitation It's not just scrapping a special status. They're also going for delimitation, which is aimed to increase seats in the Hindu majority districts in Jammu so that the importance of the Muslim majority in any future assembly is brought down a little bit. So all those things, introduction of the Domicile Act, which is, this new law, which is allowing non-state subject Indian citizens to become a part of the citizenship register of Jammu and Kashmir. All these things are seen through one prism, that is demographic change and, a settler project, which they think is aimed at changing the demography and changing the demographic complexion of Jammu and Kashmir from a Muslim majority state or Muslim majority area to a Muslim minority area.
Muzammil says that the reason that people don't have any doubts about this is because this has been BJP's agenda for a long time, something that has been talked about even in the party's manifestos.
And if we look at RSS, the parent body of this present government, they have very clearly and publicly talked about the Muslim majority character and, derided Muslim majority character of J&K. If you look at their vision and mission statement on their public website, you will see they are clearly calling Jammu and Kashmir's Muslim majority as oppressive. And they are also calling the Muslim majority of J&K as thorn in the flesh, headache for the country. The understanding of all the Sangh groups, which includes BJP, is that unless and until the Muslim majority character of Jammu and Kashmir is altered, is changed, there will not be a permanent solution to Kashmir problem.
And this is something that these mainstream parties are not ready to accept. They are not ready to accept a demographic change in the region.
They are not ready to accept an ideological project which would, finish the way we know Jammu and Kashmir. And they also know that if that type of a thing happens, they will not have anything to fight for. So they are actually more than fighting for Kashmir, they're fighting for their own survival.
Moreover, they also know that the public mood is completely against the August 5 decision.
That was also seen as a humiliation, a unilateral decision by Delhi without the consent of the people, and a humiliation. Whatever was done before and after August 5, this sort of crackdown, which we have not seen before, like thousands of troops on the streets, curfew, internet ban, communication ban, people in jail, all that crackdown was aimed to not allow people to protest and to question this decision. And the government of India thought that once time will pass and people will not react. That has been belied by this statement. The moment these people were out, the moment these people were allowed some sort of a movement, the first thing they did is to get together and issue this joint statement.
To understand this a little better, it might be helpful to take a quick look at the history of Jammu and Kashmir. During the time of independence, British India was divided into India and Pakistan and roughly 580 princely states. These princely states, which included Jammu and Kashmir, in a sense had been given the option to remain independent or to join the Dominion of India or Pakistan. At the time, Maharaja Hari Singh had been J&K's ruler, and he had initially decided to remain independent. But after tribesmen and army men from Pakistan invaded, he sought India's help, which had been looking for the princely state to accede to India. So a treaty was signed between them. And according to this agreement, the Indian Parliament was allowed to legislate J&K on defense, external affairs, and communications. But other than that, they could have their own laws. This is what gave the state its special status, the basis on which New Delhi had been interacting with the region all this while.
J&K political parties always reminded New Delhi that the reason why they have joined them in 1947 was the promise that Jammu and Kashmir will have a special status within the Indian Union. And New Delhi, it is not only BJP, but Congress party also before them, consecutive governments since 1950s have actually tried to go back on their promise. While Congress was doing it in a very slower manner, they were like hollowing out Article 370, taking away things slowly. BJP went ahead and, did it in one single assault.
The other thing Muzammil says that has been in conversation about J&K for the past 70 years has been the idea of a plebiscite. something that will allow the people of Kashmir to decide whether they want to live in India, Pakistan, or become an independent state. This has been the demand of most separatist parties in the region. He points out that India has been opposing this before the international community with arguments that J&K has their own elections and local people are the ones that get elected.
For example, National Conference was elected, People's Democratic Party was elected. And that assembly that was elected in Kashmir for the last several decades was shown as a proof that people in Kashmir decide who will govern them. They have elected governments. And that it itself means that there is no need for plebiscite. So that argument doesn't hold any water anymore. Because all those political parties that have fought elections, won elections, ruled Kashmir as part of India, as part of the Indian system, have also gone in opposed your decisions and are saying that unless and until you go back and restore the special status of Kashmir, things will not be normal.
This is why the joint statement also says that all political activities will be subservient to the sacred goal of reverting to the special status of J&K as it existed on 4th August 2019. But the question is, will this decision garner the support of the people? There are doubts, especially considering the support that these parties have is at its lowest right now.
National Conference for last 70 years, because National Conference, you have to understand, National Conference is the single political party in Kashmir that has been responsible, in Jammu and Kashmir, that has been responsible for J&K joining the Indian Union in 1947. So this party has always told people that we have signed for India on one condition, that Jammu and Kashmir will have special status. So one by one, these political parties, they have lost the main political agenda that they had. I don't think they will have anything to go back to people. And they know that after scrapping of the special status and the circumstances in which it is happening, they will have nothing to tell people.
The argument that had been put forth by New Delhi regarding the August 5th decision had been that it would enable development and ensure peace. But Muzammil says that has not happened in the past year. There is only the so-called illusion of peace.
Young people are being called to police stations, asking them to refrain from, expressing any opinion about anything political. Journalists have been booked under terror laws. Political activists of all sorts. It's like across the board. There is no divide between separatist political activists and mainstream political activists or pro-India political activists. Across the board, whosoever express any opinion is rounded up, is booked. There are cases being filed against them. We live in a state of surveillance which has never happened before. We are in a state where there is so much fear that people are not able to express any view.
This is also the reason Muzammil says that people have not come out during this time to protest. They fear the harsh repercussions they will face. So for now, they wait. And as far as development is concerned, he says that you did not need to scrap J&K's special status for it.
For example, any national investigating agency, they were functioning in Kashmir beforehand also. Who was running the administration of Kashmir? 95% of the Indian Administrative Service or Indian Police Service officers are from mainland India. Jammu Kashmir will be the only place which is a Muslim majority state, and you have had last 100 years of history of police, you will have 2 Kashmiri Muslim heads. The top bureaucracy which takes decisions on Kashmir are not local at all. And that has been a pattern for years. After the Prime Minister made that huge announcement of development projects when they joined PDP, 9% of projects have been completed in the last 5 years. So BJP was ruling Jammu and Kashmir. So it is not that BJP was in opposition. And now, because they have brought it under direct rule, they will change things. They were ruling it since 2015. Nothing has changed. So what I am saying is that this is a ruse. The reason for this has not been development. The reason for this is also not peace. Because if you look at bringing down violence, that has not happened. Bringing down recruitment of young people into militancy has not happened. Because that has never been linked to the special status of Jammu and Kashmir. So it is not that you had any, special status as a, hurdle in having some sort of military presence. Military presence was always there. So this is an alibi.
An alibi like Muzammil mentioned earlier, for BJP's social and political agenda. And now with the mainstream parties openly rejecting it, a lot will depend on how New Delhi reacts.
I think this declaration is beginning of politics in Kashmir after a year. And I think it's also a wake-up call for Delhi that force, coercion, crackdown does not succeed. It may momentarily help to enforce peace of a graveyard, but it is not permanent peace. So, it should be a wake-up call. They should start looking at their decisions. They cannot force people to accept something that was done unilaterally without their consent. And it has never happened. If you look at history also, it has never happened. You cannot wage a war against people. Eventually, people will, react to that. And looking at last 1 year, those people who think that the silence in Kashmir is some sort of a consent, approval to what happened on August 5, 2019, they are mistaken. This silence has been enforced. This is not a voluntary silence.
Dear listeners, sorry for this interruption, but before we move on to the rest of the show, I just wanted your quick attention. One of the big reasons people say they like this show is because it helps them understand the news better. It provides them with the context they need to see the bigger picture. And there is perhaps no other place that does that better than Indian Express's Explained section. We on Three Things refer to the section regularly, and it helps us make this show. If you're a regular reader of Indian Express, you know how useful the Explained section can be, especially when you're looking for in-depth analysis by the right experts. You can log on to indianexpress.com/explained and access the coverage 24/7. Explained by Indian Express, where news that matters is explained by experts who know the subject. Now, back to the show. And next we talk about COVID-19. A woman from Mumbai in her late 20s has become the first to suffer a miscarriage due to COVID-19 in India. There aren't many cases of complications in pregnancies due to the virus, and the research on this is limited. But some early studies have found out that the placenta, which is supposed to protect the fetus from infections, in fact acts as a reservoir for the SARS-CoV-2 virus. In this segment, we speak to Tabassum Banagarwala, who reports on Health for the Paper in Bombay about this case. Tabassum, last week, India had what was the first case of miscarriage due to COVID-19. It involved this woman in her 20s from Mumbai. Could you talk about what exactly we know about this case?
So, vertical transmission has been recorded in the past in multiple countries, including India. By vertical transmission, we mean that the virus transmits inside the pregnant woman's body to the fetus, through the placenta, and then through the amniotic fluid. So these cases have already been known. But what has not been known so far, there's very limited research when it comes to how COVID-19 affects the fetus, how it affects pregnancy, and what happens in postpartum period. In this particular case, which happened in ESIS hospital in Mumbai, there was a woman security guard in a government hospital who had come in contact with a COVID positive case. And she went for testing just as a precautionary measure. She had no symptoms at all. And then 5 weeks later, the nasal swabs tested negative for the virus and she was completely all right. She was out of institutional isolation. But when she went for a routine ultrasound test, the sonologist found that the fetus had actually died inside her uterus and she didn't know about it at all. So that really spurred the curiosity of the gynecologist in the hospital, and she decided to conduct few more tests on this. They approached ICMR's branch in Mumbai, which is National Institute for Research in Reproductive Health, and together they collected samples of the placenta, amniotic fluid, of the fetus membrane. They sent all these things for histopathology, and they found that the child had actually died due to inflammation which was caused because of the coronavirus. So this is first such case which has been recorded in India where a woman had to abort her fetus in the first trimester because of COVID-19.
So when these results came out, what did we find out that, how did the virus affect the fetus?
See, there is more research required in this field. There is very basic knowledge that the researchers have as of now. they're saying that in 4 steps, the virus has basically reached the fetus and caused inflammation. First, the mother has been affected. She has been infected. The virus was grew in her nasopharyngeal tract. And then somehow it traveled to the placenta. It was able to penetrate the placenta barrier. It was able to enter the amniotic fluid, and it was able to affect the fetus. Now, placenta usually is supposed to act like a barrier for the fetus. It protects the fetus from all the external infections, bacterial or viral. But in this case, what has happened is that the placenta was tested, and it was found that the virus was actually replicating in the placenta 5 weeks after the mother had been infected. So while the mother was testing negative for the placenta was actually acting like a viral reservoir for coronavirus. So basically, the researchers found that there were 2 proteins which were acting as viral receptors in the placenta. One was ACE2 and the second one was S protein proteases. These 2 proteins were found in abundant quantity in the placenta in first, second, and third trimester. So basically, these receptors allow the virus to enter a cell, and following which there's a machinery which helps the virus to replicate. So the placenta was actually acting like a viral reservoir.
How common are these cases of vertical transmission?
So vertical transmission is rare, but there have been a lot of cases recorded. For example, Pune, we saw one case where there was a vertical transmission recorded in newborn. In Wadia Hospital in Mumbai, we know that out of 200 deliveries that they have done of COVID-positive women, 3 cases were of vertical transmission because they were testing each newborn baby immediately after the delivery. So nothing but vertical transmission could be the answer for the infection to come in the newborn. There have been cases outside India as well. But when we talk about miscarriage due to vertical transmission, so far there have been 2 cases which have been reported globally. The first case was in March in Switzerland when a 28-year-old woman miscarried in her second trimester. And the researchers found that the placenta was positive for coronavirus, and they suspect that placental infection caused death of the fetus. And this is the second such case globally which has been recorded. Now, researchers think in Mumbai with the ICMR and IRRS that it is possible there are more women who are miscarrying in the first trimester, but we are not able to detect those kind of cases because a lot of women who have COVID-19 are asymptomatic. And if they are pregnant, they will actually not know that they've got the virus. And if they miscarry, they will not know that the virus was the cause of miscarriage. A lot of them don't turn up for testing because they only come for testing when they're about to deliver, not in their first or second trimester. So, there's a huge data gap. Probably we are missing cases of miscarriage due to COVID-19 because not everybody is getting tested.
By the way, how worried should pregnant mothers be, especially, let's say, in later trimesters where, especially in urban places, cities, the delivery, they happen in hospitals, which, people are anyway wary of going these days?
See, again, there are contrasting views which have come up only because there is very limited research in this area. So the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says that women who are pregnant and have COVID-19 have higher chances of hospitalization and of ICU admission. But there are also a lot of researchers which are saying that in most pregnant women, the infection is mild or asymptomatic. So a lot of women will actually get COVID-19 and they will not even come to know about it, and they will continue their routine lifestyle. The complications so far known with COVID-19 and pregnancy are limited. Newborns also who are getting this infection have been mild or asymptomatic. We have come across very few cases where newborns have died because of COVID-19. The few cases that we know are of children who are a few months old who got the infection externally through nasal droplets, and then they've succumbed to some complications. So the answer is sort of in a gray area right now. We do not know how complicated pregnancy could get because of COVID-19, but the experience of a lot of doctors in India, because they have been delivering several COVID-19 positive women, is that this infection is not affecting them badly. In Nair Hospital, for example, in Mumbai, there have been more than 900 deliveries of COVID-19 pregnant women, and they have recorded deaths in only 4 cases. And all these 4 deaths were due to several other reasons, not just COVID-19. And there have been 0 newborn deaths. So this data itself shows that it's not a really dangerous disease for newborns and pregnant women.
And in the end, we talk about the town of Mahad in Maharashtra's Raigad district, where a 5-story residential building had collapsed on Monday evening. Sagar Rajput, our reporter from Mumbai who had visited the site, tells us what happened that day.
The incident took place at around 6:30 p.m. What had happened is the pillars of the building broke suddenly. So one pillar broke and the pressure of the building came on the rest of the pillars, and then suddenly every pillar broke and the building collapsed. So when I went to the spot, I spoke to several residents and they told me that they had 5 minutes window to, escape from the building. Initially, what the Manmad Municipal Council had information was around 84 people were inside the building at the time of the incident, and around 50 or 54 people had managed to, escape in that 5 minutes window. So they had the task of rescuing around 30 people, of which few were onlookers as well. I mean, the people who were passing by or people who saw that the building was about to collapse and who kind of tried to alert that something is wrong with the building and escape as soon as you can. So even they got stuck under the debris.
On the first day, Sagar says 15 people had been rescued and one person died. Though that one person had not been inside the building at the time of the collapse. He had come to visit a relative and for some reason had stepped out momentarily.
And he saw the building collapse from 100 meters distance. But as he had sustained some injuries, he was taken to the hospital and there he died due to cardiac arrest. And even his death has been counted as one of the deaths in the building collapse.
The locals and civic officials had begun trying to remove the debris, but the National Disaster Response Force, or NDRF, was called as well. When they arrived, they had the task of rescuing 18 people. The task had been particularly challenging because of the way the building collapsed, a collapse called the pancake collapse.
The pancake collapse are very difficult for them because the whole debris are falling over each other. The floors, so when the pancake collapse happens, the floor crash on top of each other and the debris are stacked like a pancake tower. So the rescue operation becomes difficult. And DRF official was telling me that these guys are always scared that while trying to rescue them, they don't harm anyone who is trapped inside, So with the help of their canines, they try to do a recce, whether any person is breathing on the top of the debris or, So layer by layer, they start removing, and after every layer, the canines are asked to, sniff around whether they could hear any heartbeat, and if they don't give any indication that there is anyone around, so they start digging again and again.
The rescue operation went on for 33 hours. In the end, 16 dead bodies were removed from the debris. And the NDRF, Sagar says, managed to rescue 2 people, one 4-year-old boy and an elderly woman. The death toll could have been much higher, but like Sagar mentioned earlier, 54 people had managed to escape before the building collapsed. And part of that credit goes to the quick thinking of 2 people, Irfan Joglikar and Aves Chichkar, 2 residents of the building.
So this Irfan was out for some work, and when he reached home at around 6:25 or 6:20, he asked his daughter to get something to eat, etc. And when his daughter told him that she could sense that the building is kind of shaking, he didn't believe her initially. So when even he sensed it and he came out of his apartment, he saw that the building was shaking and it was not anything like an earthquake or anything. So what he did was he asked his daughter and his wife to run outside the building, and then he started knocking the doors of every apartment. So there are 4 apartments in each floor. So he started knocking the doors of every apartment, intimating them that something is wrong with the building, please go outside. Likewise, even Aves on the other wing, so he was in the kitchen when his fridge fell suddenly and he could sense that the building is kind of shaking. So both of them, what they did was knocked on each apartment and checked whether they are there or not, and then they escaped and informed everyone else, asking them to leave this building.
Now, questions have been raised about the building's construction and those involved in the making of it.
So when I went to the spot yesterday, I met few residents and few other people. They were telling me that it was only after 3 years that the building had already started developing cracks. So they were telling me that the quality of the material that the builder has used is so low. One person was telling me that whenever they used to play cricket and they did a shot or something, when the tennis ball hit the building, a huge chunk of cement or concrete would fall. And one person was telling me that he happened to dash his bicycle on one of the walls of the building and same thing happened. So they knew that something was wrong with the building, and accordingly they were trying to convince the builder to renovate it or make the structure more stronger. But the builder didn't listen to them and he wasn't convinced that the structure was not as strong. So On the basis of what the Raigad police have got, they have registered an FIR and booked the builder, the consultant, and the architect of the building. And 2 other municipal council officials have also been booked for sanctioning the OC of the building. Because if the building is collapsing after 7 years of its construction, then it raises questions to what these municipal council officials checked while sanctioning the occupation certificate for the building.
During the time of this recording, no arrests had been made. But shortly after it, yesterday evening, the consultant involved in the making of the building had been arrested. A man named Bahubali Dhamane, on whose consultation the building's raw materials had been picked. The police are still on the lookout for the 4 other men. You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargav, and as always was edited and mixed by our producer Joshua Thomas. Before we go, here's another reminder to check out Indian Express's Explain section. You can log on to indianexpress.com/explain and find in-depth analysis by the right experts. It has everything you need to know to understand the news better and see the bigger picture. If you like this show, then you can subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.